Welcome to Pieces of the Past. My name is Deborah. I have a passion for fiber arts and creating new things from old. Join me on my journey as I explore the endless possibilities, the tools, and the techniques to create new pieces of the past. Today I want to show you a little bit about how I store my fabrics from the bolts down to the scraps. I had a question recently on one of my videos on how to cut up the scraps that I have to keep them organized. They asked me, okay, that's fine. How do you store those after you've cut them up? What do you do with them? So we're going to go through that today real quick. I want to show you how I do mine, and maybe it will give you an idea of how to store yours. Okay, so we start with the fabrics that we get at the fabric store. I didn't buy these in bolts, but I've wrapped them in bolts because I bought yardage. So these are, 2 yards and up of different fabrics, and I keep them by color and so forth. So when I take the fabric off of the bolt, then I use it to make a dress or whatever, a quilt, whatever. Then I come over here and I end up with scraps. So you know how you end up with pieces like this? So you've cut the pattern out of it and you've got this thing, right? And how do you store this? You can't even fold it, really. So in my scrap video, I show how you would cut this piece off and then you would cut these down into squares and strips to make it manageable. So you can watch that video for that part, but the way that I store those is what we're going over today. And here's some more examples. You got this thing, it's got this little piece hanging up. What do you do with this? So when I first started storing fabrics that were leftovers, okay, scraps, I put them in bags. Everybody recognizes this. It's a grocery bag. I put them in bags. And that was great for a little while. And then I had to move to putting them in bags by color because I had too many reds and too many blues. And so I had all these bags with color. Well, then the bags don't stack or anything. And so when those started overrunning, I thought, oh no, I've got to do something. So that's when I started cutting my scraps down into manageable squares and strips that I could go to, basically like pre-cuts, and pull the blue strips that were 2.5 inches, that kind of thing. And that worked really well. So let me show you how I do that. Okay, so I cut my pattern, my quilt, whatever, out of the fabric, and then I have those scraps. I cut those down. Now, if I have a yard or less, about down to a fat quarter, let's say, I will store them in mini bolts. So these are my mini bolts, and they're organized roughly by color. Let me show you how that works. So they're little bitty bolts. I cut 6 by 6 inch pieces of cardboard, and this cardboard, most of it came from Amazon boxes. First, when we get something in a shipment, I just cut up the box and use the cardboard. So this is what I do. I roll it on this, and then I put them by color or by designs. Like these are all novelties, and these are greens and so forth. Okay, so when I'm looking for just a little bit of a certain color, I'll come over here and pull what I want out of these. Now, when the scraps get too small for these, say a 1/4 yard maybe, then I'll start cutting them down into strips and squares and that kind of thing. I do have fat quarters as well. These are my fat quarters. I forgot I was going to show you this. These are my fat quarters. So they're in buckets. This is when we start moving into the buckets and things, because as of now, you see I have stuff on shelves. So then we move into the fat quarters that I keep in buckets by color. This is black and brown. When they get smaller than a fat quarter, that's when I start cutting them down into strips and squares, and then I store them somewhere else. So let's go over here. Here's some old bolts right here. And then you can see these drawers. Got them on Amazon. They're not super cheap, but they're not terribly expensive. I have them organized by size. These are my 1.5-inch strips, and they go down, my 2-inch strips, 2.5-inch strips, and so forth. And so if I need strips, say red, 2-inch strips of red, I've got tons of them here that I've pre-cut. So these are basically my pre-cuts instead of going to the store. These are my 2.5-inch pre-cuts and so forth. They go all the way down to 3.5-inch strips. And then on this side, I have my squares. They start with 1.5-inch squares and they go down, still organized by color. Let me pull that out so you can see it. Woo. There we go. And those squares get larger as well. I've got 2.5, 3.5, and so forth, all the way down to about 6.5. So one of the things I really like about this system is that if I'm looking for a particular fabric, say a red, and I have a 1/2 yard over there on a mini bolt, okay, but I need just a little bit more, then I'll come over here and I'll get a strip, because maybe the piece I'm cutting out is 3 inches wide, and I've got a 3.5-inch strip that is in that same fabric. So I just go from piece to piece until I get the right number of fabrics, the right amount that I need for my quilt. So that is great. So if you need a 2-inch, something out of a 2-inch square, let's say we need 2-inch squares for our quilt, then I will pull the colors I want out of my 2-inch squares. But if I don't have enough, I'll just go down to the 3.5-inch squares and cut them down to 2.5. So it's a great system. I can just keep going up until I find those colors I want and just cut them down for my quilt. So that's how I store my fabrics. Now, one last thing, I cut selvages off. If you haven't watched my selvage video on how to make fabric out of selvage, go check that one out. So I keep my selvages in a bucket. These are all my selvage edges, and from time to time I make selvage fabric out of these. And then the only other exception to this whole organization thing is that I keep my batiks, because they are a particular kind of fabric and I don't like them mixed in with all of my other quilting cottons. I keep my batiks in a separate boxes. So that's pretty much it. Label everything and you're good to go. So that's about it for this video today. I hope this gives you some tips on how to organize your stash of fabrics. And if you like this video, give us a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed already, please do. And leave us a comment. We like to correspond with you in the comments. That's really great. Until next time, we'll see you later. Thanks for watching.